Peter King from Sports Illustrated, of course, Football Night in America, joining us in studio, New York City Man Cave. And I'll get around to talking about the coaching changes. But let me ask you the poll question. Mm-hmm. Chip Kelly, better for him to stay at Oregon or go to the NFL?
He's got to go to the NFL. I mean, there are times in your life when you're hot. I don't know how he's ever going to be hotter than he is now in a year when there are a lot of openings. And I've heard people say, well, there's always a lot of openings in the NFL. Well, if Chip Kelly turns it down now and goes back to Oregon, how can he do better? Even if he wins a national championship, he's not going to have more people in the NFL want him. Now, the only thing I would say about this group of teams that want him, Cleveland, Buffalo, Philadelphia, and I'm positive there will be others. But, you know, none of those teams right now, to me, has such a shiny, bright future that I'd run to them if I'm Chip Kelly. I think the Eagles are flawed, and, you know, Nick Foles is not his kind of quarterback, you know. So, but again, I would take one of these jobs if I were him. Everybody in Oregon now knows he's got 2 feet out the door, so how is he going to walk back in? He knows he's going, and they know he's going.
But if you're looking at these jobs, it's rare when there's a coaching vacancy in a good position. You know, there's usually a reason why.
Right.
I thought Kansas City was interesting because while you do have the number 1 pick, and granted, there's probably, you know, the Clowney is not available this year.
Right.
But if you're looking at that, you know, they can run the football, that fan base, the nucleus there with Pioli there in place. I thought Kansas City was a sneaky great job. Am I wrong on that?
I love the Kansas City job, and I don't think Scott Pioli is going to be there, Dan. I think that Clark Hunt has been very nice and very careful in everything he said about it, but I think he realizes that any honeymoon that a new coach would bring, say Andy Reid, if you have Scott Pioli up on the dais, there's so many people in Kansas City who are so anti-Pioli, I just don't think he can bring him back. So my feeling is sometime in the next week or so, they'll probably get a divorce and he'll pay Scott off for whatever last year or so of his contract. But I think that Kansas City is a really good job. I'll never forget going to Kansas City this past August and looking at their skill position players. And I visited 23 camps this year, and I thought they had the best combination of skill players in the game. If you consider that you've got Jamal Charles and Peyton Hillis. You've got Dexter McCluster, who I thought was a slot receiver in, you know, classic slot receiver way. You've got Jonathan Baldwin, who I think is going to be good. You got Dwayne Bowe. You know, you got Steve Breston. You have more talent at tight end than people give you credit for. It just so happened that Kevin Boss and Moeaki again got hurt. But I thought they had a really good team. I thought they'd get a pretty good offensive line. You know, what happened is they just didn't have a quarterback. So to me, I look at that team. Let's say they take Luke Joeckel, who everybody I think believes right now if he comes out will probably be the number 1 pick. So you got a Jake Long there, and now you don't have to overpay a guy who's a good but not great left tackle in Brandon Albert, who's going to be a free agent. You let him go. You bring in Joeckel at a very manageable salary for the next 4 years, and you have right now, if you can get a quarterback, if Andy Reid or whoever it's going to be gets a quarterback, I think they're going to be a good team.
Chicago, yeah, first of all, surprised that, you know, if Adrian Peterson doesn't get 20 yards, you know, in the final drive and they don't have a field goal, or they lose in overtime, is Lovie Smith still going to be the coach of this team?
I think if they made the playoffs, it would have been very hard for the Bears to fire Lovie Smith.
Wow.
I do. But, you know, that's the way football works a lot of times. And again, I'm not saying shame on Lovie for making it so close. But this was a team that was 6-1 at one point.
Yeah.
You know, so everybody was saying, boy, Lovie, what a victim. I don't say that. I mean, this is the second year in a row. Last year it was the loss of Cutler. This year they just played crappy again down the stretch, and this time they had Cutler. They have not fixed the offensive line. They haven't figured out how to play well on offense with that offensive line consistently, so I don't know. I mean, again, I really like Lovie Smith, and I think he's a very good coach. But again, you go 5 out of 6 years without making the playoffs or whatever it is, whatever that stat is, you're going to be a victim in this game.
But you're looking at these coaching vacancies here. Is San Diego going to stay in San Diego? And if they would go to L.A., what does that do for that?
See, that's one of the big questions I would have if I'm going to be a coach or a general manager there. Some people will just blindly go to a place, I want to be a head coach, I want to be a general manager. But I think San Diego, San Diego, Oakland, those are the two most logical teams to move to LA. I'd want to know that. And I'm not sure that the Spanos family right now can tell a coach or a general manager candidate anything, because I really think that they truly don't know what's going to happen. But that would be a little pockmark on that job. As much as you think, boy, I'd love to have a crack at Phillip Rivers, I'd also love to know where I was going to be playing in 3 years.
What happened to Andy Reid, 95% sure he was going to Arizona?
Well, when Adam Schefter tweeted that the other day, and I looked back on it because I know he was getting a lot of crap about it yesterday, he said, one source told me that Andy Reid is 95% sure. He didn't say, I am reporting that I'm 95% sure that Andy Reid is going to do this. And Dan, I got to tell you, at this time of year, crap happens. And I don't mean to absolve anybody of anything, but all I can tell you is if what you heard on Monday we set in stone, there'd be about 3 things that are totally wrong.
Yeah.
I got to tell you something. I really thought Andy Reid was coaching the Arizona Cardinals. And you know what? Until it's on the dotted line, I don't believe yet that it's rock solid he's going to Kansas City. And I'm a little bit nervous that in 24 hours, this thing has just not really coagulated. This is just sort of laying out there. So let's see what happens. But I think one of the other problems with Arizona right now is I think there's a lot of people in that organization who say, we got to keep Steve Keim and make him our general manager. Well, now Keim is out interviewing for other jobs, so who knows what's going to happen there.
Yeah, we're talking to Peter King from Sports Illustrated. Do you know when you're being used? If an agent gives you information? A GM, player?
Sometimes. And, I think, and I'm not saying this was a case of anybody being used in any way, but I think this whole Bill O'Brien thing in the last couple of days is a little fishy to me.
It bothers me. It bothers me how this sort of, he said he wasn't a one-and-done guy, and then you have your agent out there, what they were knocking down the door, and then he got a $1 million raise?
If you say, here's my objection to it, if you say you're not one and done, and you go on 2 interviews, well, what that says to me is, if you got a job offer, you were going to be a one and done. But because you didn't get a job offer, then you're not a one and done. That's what it says to me. That's what it says to me. But again, the whole time this happened, the whole time this was going on, I'm saying to myself, please stay at Penn State. Please give those people a chance. I mean, this is one horrible, terrible guy and apparently a cover-up, but 99.98% of the people who have anything to do with sitting in that stadium on a Saturday afternoon don't deserve that. You know what I mean? They don't. They had nothing to do with it, and they love football and they love their team. I just would love to see. First of all, I'd love to see that lawsuit against the NCAA, get some legs and reduce these sanctions, which I thought all along, $60 million and the near death penalty for that length of time. It seemed a little bit severe to me, but whatever.
John Gruden, Bill Cowher, you keep hearing those names. I feel like they sort of floated out there, and it's a nice money grab for him because I didn't think Gruden was going to Tennessee. Is there a job out there other than the Cowboys for Gruden where you say, all right, he'll step out of the booth?
I think the only 2 jobs out there, first of all, it's hard for me to imagine that Phil Emery would want to get married to John Gruden in Chicago. Not to say it's impossible, but it's, Phil Emery, I think, wants a more orderly place, and I think there's a certain amount of riverboat gambler with Gruden. I think he fits Jerry Jones a lot more. Now, the reason why I still think that Gruden is hanging out there just a little bit, Dan, is because Jerry Jones has said it's going to be uncomfortable. We're going to make changes. And he's meeting about personnel this week with his coaching staff. And next week, he and Stephen Jones are going to sit down for a couple of very long and I think uncomfortable days with Jason Garrett. What'll happen? At the end of the day, I still think there's an 80% chance Garrett's the coach of the team. But with Jerry Jones, you never say never.
Cowher?
I think he's been out too long now. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying he couldn't go back, and I'm not saying it's a case of Vermeil where you go back a decade later or something, but the world is different. Everybody says, well, why won't Cowher go back? Well, if you were making $2 million a year and not having to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and worry about everything that an NFL coach has to worry about, that's enervating to some degree. It's energizing to some degree. But to another degree, why do you need the headache? And, I think at some point you have to look at a guy like Bill Cowher and you have to say, who's his coaching staff? And does he wake up at 5 in the morning saying, I have to go make a game plan to beat the Ravens this week? I don't know that a coach who's been out of it that long can retain that.
What about Nick Saban?
Everybody I talk to who knows anything about Nick Saban says he's not coming out. So I don't think he's going to come out. I think the only way he'd come out is to go to a place that had a quarterback, because he's never going to go to a place that doesn't have a quarterback. So he's not going to Cleveland. Brandon Weeden might be a quarterback, but nobody knows. And again, I just don't think that a guy like Nick Saban is going to go to some place where there's a very strong general manager. I think he wants a good deal of control. Not all the control, because he made it clear when he coached the Dolphins that he didn't need to draft all the players, but he clearly wants to be in control for the major decisions. I don't see it this year, Dan, but those things usually you don't see coming.
Chip Kelly, and then we've talked about Brian Kelly. Any thought, is Brian Kelly's name out there with the NFL?
It's funny. I have not heard Brian Kelly talked about at all. I just haven't. And it isn't that people don't like him. It's just that I don't know what it is other than he's sort of, floating out there in his own little constellation. He's done a fabulous job. And I think most people think he's probably not going to leave there, at least for a while. But most coaches want to try the NFL. I would assume Brian Kelly one of these years will want to try the NFL. As far as Chip Kelly goes, I forget at some point on Football Night in America, we talked about it. And I remember because there were 2 or 3 general managers in the NFL who were saying, this is the guy who will be the hot guy in the offseason. I remember when I first said it, a bunch of people on Twitter said his offense will never work in the NFL. That's possible. But I remember in 1989, people laughing about Jimmy Johnson's small speed defense. That'll never work in the NFL. And then, 3 of the next 6 years, the Dallas Cowboys win the Super Bowl. So who's to say his offense won't work? Is there anybody who is listening to this show who believes that last August we would see the Seattle Seahawks, Washington Redskins, Carolina Panthers, and San Francisco 49ers all having the option play, all looking like the wishbone, all looking like Fran Tarkenton is the quarterback of the team? Anybody believe that was going to be a prime part of 4 contending? Well, Carolina's not contending, but 3 of the 4 are playoff teams. That's why everybody says, oh, that'll never happen. Well, it's happening right now. So don't tell me Chip Kelly's offense can't work in the NFL.
Good to see you, Pete. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
He's Peter King from Sports Illustrated.